Thragg thinks Mark is a mistake. The man has an entire belief system built around Viltrumite purity, and Mark is the living proof that one of his best soldiers went off mission and had a child with a human. So when we ask what happens if Mark joins him, we have to start there. Not with the powers or the strategy, with the fact that Thragg would take Mark's loyalty and never truly give him anything real in return. The window that works best for this to happen is right after Nolan's attack on Chicago disappearance. Think about exactly where Mark is at that moment. His father just dismantled everything, revealed that every training exercise Mark thought was a loving dad helping him catch up was actually advanced preparation for Earth's conquest, beat him nearly to death when he tried to stop it, and then lost a fight to a version of Mark who was running entirely on grief and adrenaline and barely knew what he was doing. Then Nolan left. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone into deep space because the alternative was letting the son he'd been lying to his whole life finish the job. Mark is laying in that crater afterward, devastated. Physically, yes, but psychologically the damage is worse. Every assumption he had about who he was and where he came from has been stripped out in a single afternoon. He's half of something that just tried to kill him, and the other half lives in a world that will never stop associating him with Omni-Man regardless of what he does next. Cecil moves in fast, which matches what happens in canon. But in canon, Cecil is also the reason Mark stays tethered, through obligation, through guilt, through the sense that Earth is still worth protecting even when the people running its defense aren't worth trusting. For this scenario to work, that tether snaps. Maybe Cecil pushes too hard too fast, like surveillance that crosses a line, an operation Mark finds out about that makes staying feel less like heroism and more like being managed. The Reaniman Project would do it. Finding out that Cecil was having criminals' corpses reanimated into soldiers while telling Mark he was a partner in the defense of Earth would be enough to make the arrangement feel like a lie. The how is less important than the result. Mark at his lowest, with no anchor strong enough to hold him in place. That's when Thragg reaches out. Not in person. Thragg doesn't come to you when you're broken, because showing up personally communicates need, and Thragg never communicates need. He sends a representative, a Viltrumite soldier with a message that would act as a door being opened. You are Viltrumite. You have been living as something beneath what you come from. Come and see what that looks like. Mark goes. Not because he's convinced, because he's lost, and this is at least a direction. The pitch Thragg gives Mark when they finally meet isn't warmth. Warmth isn't something Thragg does, and Mark would see through it if he tried. What Thragg offers is something more useful to someone in Mark's position. Clarity. Your father was a celebrated warrior before he lost his discipline. Your human blood is a complication, not a disqualification. Prove what you're capable of in the field, and you earn your standing. No sentimentality, no mythology built around his half-human status. A simple offer. What Thragg leaves out is the part that would end the conversation before it started. In the comics, Thragg is sitting on a piece of knowledge that represents the single greatest threat to his position at the top of the Empire. Nolan, Omni-Man, he is descended from Argal, the first Viltrumite, the origin of the entire species and the strongest one who ever existed. That bloodline carries a tendency. Whoever inherits it far enough down the line stands to become the most powerful Viltrumite alive, which means Mark, as Nolan's son, isn't just a half-breed with impressive power. He's a ticking clock. Thragg has known this and kept it locked down. His entire posture toward Nolan over the years, and now toward Mark, isn't loyalty to Viltrumite blood. It's asset management that is quietly becoming threat management. You keep the dangerous thing close where you can monitor it. You don't let it develop somewhere outside your reach. Bringing Mark into the Empire is not an act of generosity toward a talented young soldier. It's the most controlled way to handle a problem that, left alone, becomes uncontrollable. It's also worth understanding what this means for how Thragg interacts with Mark day to day. Every piece of positive reinforcement Thragg provides, the missions, the advancement, the respect of other soldiers, the growing sense that Mark has a place here, is a product of a calculation, not feeling. Thragg doesn't resent Mark for existing. He's not lying to him out of some personal cruelty. He's managing a strategic variable the way he manages every strategic variable, with patience and long-range thinking and zero sentiment about the outcome. The warmth in the arrangement is entirely Mark's, projected onto interactions that are being conducted without it. That's what makes it work as a trap. Yes, the person being managed fills in the emotional dimension that the manager never provided. Mark doesn't know any of this. He's roughly 20 years old. His father is somewhere in deep space. His mother is sitting at home trying to process the collapse of her entire marriage, and the most powerful figure in the known galaxy is telling him there's a place where he belongs. The attraction isn't complicated. It's the same thing people feel toward belonging anywhere. The relief of being told that who you are is enough, that there's a community that fits someone like you. It's almost funny that it takes the grand regent of a conquering alien empire to deliver that message to a kid from a Virginia suburb, but that's where they both are. There's also a physical dimension to the offer that is easy to underestimate. On Earth, Mark has always been holding back. Every fight, every training session, every casual interaction, he's constantly measuring down because the people around him don't survive full effort. Punch too hard, move too fast, land wrong, and someone is gravely injured or worse. That restraint accumulates in ways that are hard to describe to someone who doesn't carry it. In the Empire, that calculation disappears. He can train at full capacity against people who don't break so easily. He can push and get pushed back at a level he's never experienced. For someone who has spent his entire career operating with one hand tied behind his back, that release hits fast and hard. He'd feel it within the first week of training, and it would make everything else more bearable. Thragg also knows when to stay out of the picture. He doesn't hover over Mark, he doesn't micromanage. He assigns him to a unit under an experienced commander and lets the culture do the shaping over time. This is the smarter approach by a significant margin. Pressing Mark directly into the Imperial mold would create friction. Mark would feel the pressure and respond to it. Letting the environment do the work slowly over months and years creates a person who thinks he arrived at his values through his own experience. That version is much harder to undo. Viltrumite military culture cares about output. You perform, you advance, you show weakness. Someone stronger than you demonstrates why weakness is not acceptable here. Not out of cruelty. Cruelty implies emotion. Viltrumite discipline is more like physics than emotion. Mark's body handles this. His healing factor, his strength, his durability, all of it responds to the training in ways that are hard to overstate. Within months, he's stronger than when he left Earth. Within a year, the gap has grown enough that it would genuinely shock anyone who knew him before. The problem is everything that runs alongside the physical gains. Viltrumite soldiers don't build emotional ties to the populations they're sent to manage. They don't negotiate when force is the faster option. They don't consider the experience of the people on the receiving end of a conquest because those people are not the relevant variable. The Empire is the relevant variable, its continuity, its expansion, its dominance. Everything else resolves into one of two categories, useful or obstructive. You learn to sort quickly. Mark gets his first assignment within a few months, not a war. The Empire doesn't call it that. An enforcement action on a planet that has been resisting integration into Imperial governance. His commanding officer tells him he won't need to do much. His presence alone, his power level made visible, should communicate enough for the resistance leaders to back down. He does it. He flies in, demonstrates what he can do against some infrastructure to make the point credible, watches the resistance do the math, and decide the odds aren't there. He goes back telling himself it was over because nobody died while he was present. He's mostly right. Nobody dies while he's there. He doesn't ask what happens to the resistance leaders after he leaves. He doesn't get an honest answer if he does. He files the job away and moves on because sitting with it means asking questions he doesn't have the tools or need to answer, and the Empire's schedule doesn't leave a lot of quiet time for questions. This is the first erosion. Small, deniable, not a collapse. Just a moment where he chose not to look at the margins, and they were there whether he looked or not. He's going to keep making that choice in slightly larger increments for the next year or two. That's how it works. It's never one big thing. It's the accumulation of small ones, each individually manageable, each individually filed away, until the stack is so tall that looking at it all at once becomes impossible. The second deployment is harder to rationalize. There's a city that has become an active staging ground for resistance. Infrastructure that needs to come down. Mark does it. There are people in those buildings when some of them fall. The official count afterward is written up in Imperial language that makes the number look smaller than it is. Mark reads the report and feels something that he doesn't name and doesn't examine. He moves on because the unit moves on, and stopping would mean stopping alone. The third time out is easier than the second was. That's the part he should worry about. The soldiers he trains and operates with aren't what people on Earth would imagine. They're not brutal in the way that's easy to hate. They're professionals, and there's a meaningful difference. Some have a dry humor that catches Mark off guard. A few have enough depth to be worth knowing, at least on their own terms. The camaraderie that develops is real in the way military camaraderie is always real, forged in shared difficulty and mutual reliance regardless of what the shared mission serves. Mark gets pulled into it. This is the first time since before Nolan left that he's felt included in something without having to explain or defend himself or calibrate down. So the feeling is strong enough that he stops examining what it's built on. That's not an accident. The structure is doing exactly what Thragg set it up to do, and Viltrumite culture doesn't present itself as cruel, it presents itself as honest. The argument runs something like this: every civilization that survives does so by being stronger than what threatens it. Strength is not optional, it's the basic requirement of continued existence. The Empire is the strongest force in the galaxy, which means it is the thing most likely to ensure long-term survival on a scale that smaller, weaker civilizations can't manage on their own. Integration into the Empire isn't conquest in the way humans use that word, it's elevation. The absorbed become part of something that will outlast anything they could have built independently. Mark hears this argument and recognizes it as the same logic Nolan tried to use on him in that crater. And he rejects it for the same reasons he rejected it then. But rejection isn't immunity. Living inside the argument day after day, surrounded by people who hold it not as propaganda but as basic fact, wears on the rejection in ways that are hard to track. You don't suddenly believe it, you just find yourself arguing against it with slightly less energy than you did the week before. And then the week before that. The argument doesn't win. It just slowly drains the pushback. That's a more lasting way to change someone than beating them in an argument. Mark's resistance to this is the most important variable in the whole scenario. Based on everything we know about his character from the comics and the show, it holds up for a long time, longer than Thragg would prefer, long enough that the missions have to escalate significantly before he breaks. The core of who he is runs deep, but the Empire has time, and getting Mark 100% on board with their mission and their methods is a top priority. Meanwhile, the losses on the Earth side of this take time to fully register for Mark, but they quietly become more permanent with each passing day. Debbie Grayson is the one that doesn't get named. No dramatic farewell. She gets a son who stops coming home, then a son who stops reaching out, then years of silence with no explanation she could make sense of. In canon, Debbie's story runs on surviving the removal of the people she loves. She survived Nolan. She built something real out of the ruin of that. In this version, she loses Mark too. Mark doesn't stop thinking about her. The connection doesn't disappear. It just has nowhere to go. He can't call her from wherever the Empire has him deployed, and he couldn't even describe what he's been doing in terms she could ever accept. The distance becomes permanent through accumulation rather than any single decision. He keeps meaning to deal with it later. Later never arrives. The thing is, Debbie would know, before he fully admits it to himself, that something has gone irreversibly wrong. Mothers of soldiers often do. She's not cold, she's not punishing him. She's just a woman who has been left twice now, and she learns the second time that holding on to the pain doesn't bring anyone back. Eve is a different kind of absence. In the comics at this point, they're not yet together romantically, alright? That develops over time. But she's one of the only people who has ever looked at Mark like she expects him to do the right thing, and is prepared to be disappointed if he doesn't. That's not a small thing. Most people in Mark's life either hero worship him or need something from him, or are managing him the way Cecil managed everyone. Eve just holds him to a standard and means it. Losing that mirror has consequences that compound over time. The Empire surrounds him with capable, effective people. It doesn't give him anyone who looks at an order and says the cost is too high, this is wrong, I won't do this. Eve would say that. She always would. Without her, that voice has no one to carry it, and it goes quiet in a way that's easy to confuse with peace. There's also the specific dimension of what Eve does with her powers that matters here. She uses them based on what she thinks is right. Not what the task requires, not what the chain of command says, not what the math produces. What she personally believes. That way of operating is completely alien to the Viltrumite approach. And being away from it for years doesn't just mean losing a friend. It means losing the clearest working model Mark ever had for what it looks like to act from conviction rather than instruction. In the Empire, conviction and instruction are supposed to be the same thing. They're not. Mark will eventually learn that distinction again from the inside, but the lesson costs more without Eve's example to point back to. William is the loss that tells you the most about what the Empire has done to Mark's internal landscape. The friendship that mattered most in his human life, mutual, uncomplicated, built on nothing except two people who happen to like each other, becomes a distant memory. There's no falling out, no confrontation. The two realities simply don't fit together anymore. You can't be a soldier assigned to the edge of Imperial space and maintain a friendship with a guy back on Earth, which is bound to be conquered itself at some point. Mark doesn't lose William through any specific failure. He just grows too far in a direction William can't go and doesn't look back. What the Empire gives him in place of all of this is proximity to power and a sense of purpose, with terms he hasn't read carefully enough. He mistakes being needed with being understood. The difference is significant. The Empire needs his bloodline, his growing strength, his value as a symbol. Omni-Man's son fighting for the cause his father abandoned, which is useful as a symbol and as a warning at the same time. None of that is knowing him. Nobody in the Empire knows who he is underneath the power. They just know he is an asset. Thragg's tracking everything Mark does with the patience of someone who has been doing this for longer than most civilizations have existed. Every operation Mark runs, Thragg notes the capability it reveals. Every measurable power increase, Thragg logs it. It's the same type of calculation a chess player runs when a piece is too important to leave on the board unsupervised, and Thragg has to keep an eye on Mark. In the comics, when Thragg fully grasps what Nolan's bloodline means, his response is not to welcome the potential. He moves to eliminate it, going directly after Nolan's child with Andressa. He pursues it with the same cold efficiency he applies to military problems, because to him, it is a military problem. A bloodline that could produce something stronger than him isn't a source of pride for the Empire. It's an existential threat to his position, and Thragg has held his position for a very long time by removing existential threats early. In this scenario, Mark inside the Empire changes the timing of that calculation, but not the direction. Thragg keeps him close, uses him, lets the camaraderie and the sense of having a place to belong shape his mind. At some point, that phase ends. The assignments start coming in harder, more dangerous, pushed to levels that can pass as appropriate challenges for a soldier at Mark's level. The kind of difficulty that could, in the right circumstances, result in an accident or a field casualty. Thragg doesn't need Mark to die in some dramatic confrontation. That's actually the outcome he'd most like to avoid. Because a direct attempt on Mark at this power level carries a meaningful risk of failure, and a failed assassination attempt on a soldier inside your own empire is the kind of thing that creates instability. What Thragg wants is for the environment to do it, for Mark to run out of luck on a job that was always going to be lethal in a way that leaves no record of intent. He's been patient long enough to wait for that. Mark doesn't recognize this shift for what it is. He reads the harder assignments as trust. The heroes who filled the space Mark left would have complicated feelings about someone who chose the Empire over Earth walking back in and expecting to be trusted with the same responsibilities. They'd be right to feel complicated about it. The world doesn't have a role for what Mark anymore. He'd have to build a new one, and there's no guarantee anyone helps him do that. The most honest version of this story is the one where the return doesn't fix things simply. Where Mark comes home, if he comes home, and finds that the years spent away changed what home is, he can be sorry and mean it. He can commit to being different going forward. He can spend years proving it. None of that erases the window when it mattered most, when the people who loved him needed him to choose differently, and he didn't. They aren't wrong to hold on to that. Mark, who has enough of himself left to understand what he did, would know they aren't wrong. Carrying that truth while trying to be better is an incredibly heavy weight, even for Invincible. Thragg set out to contain a threat and built the most dangerous version of his own eventual enemy. He did it by offering Mark the one thing Earth couldn't give him at the right moment, a place where being what he was felt like enough. Mark's goodness survives the Empire, just barely, but surviving and being whole are not the same thing. The version of him that walks away still has to live with every choice he made out there. But by the time Mark understood that, the debt was already too high. Subscribe to get more breakdowns and analysis of everything Invincible, and be here when Season 5 drops.